All right. Hello there. We're going to be talking about the kingdom Anamalia today. So if you watch the video on the different classifications and how we classify organisms, you'll know that we have kingdom Animalia and then what we call the plant kingdom. And so we're just going to go through briefly the different phylums. So we're going to specify what's going on, so that we could get a better feel of what's going on as far as how things are ordered and structured. So in Kingdom Animalia, uh, heterotrophs. So animals are heterotrophs. And what that means is that we eat other plants or animals. So where plants kind of just produce their own food through photosynthesis, we have to go and eat something, whether it's a plant or an animal, in order to produce energy. And we're eukaryotic. So we're organisms, and you ran into this when you did your organelle project, organisms that have cells that contain a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. We're multicellular. We have no cell wall, no chloroplast. So in plants, they have cell walls and chloroplasts. So that's what differentiates us. And then we're motile. So that's just a fancy way of saying we have the ability to move. Now, we are going to see some exceptions to that, but when we do create these different groupings, we're trying to come up with the greatest number of commonalities, and there's going to be some that don't fall exactly in it. And then animals have sense organs, so we hear, we smell, we see, and that differentiates us a lot from plants that don't do the similar thing. My PowerPoint is not moving. We're just gonna awkwardly stay here until the slide moves. There we go. So we'll talk about nine different phyla, and so that's gonna be the second classification. And so we'll talk about porifera, which are sponges. We'll talk about cnidaria, which are jellyfish, sea anemones, and coral. Platyhelminthes, which are flatworms. Nematoda, roundworms. Annelida, which are earthworms. Mollusca, which are shelled animals. Arthropoda, which are insects and spiders. And Echinodermata, which are spiny skin. And Chordata, are vertebrates. Hey, that's us. And as you can see, or here, these are not the easiest things to pronounce or say, so hey, don't worry about nailing that one. So, porifera, sponges. So not the sponges you use around the house. So they're asymmetrical. So they're just gonna look, they look a lot like plants. Just have a bunch of different parts flying about to them. And they have pores, so these are used for filters. So like water will go through them, and they just kind of pick out things in the water. It's how they eat. So they're not motile. Remember, we just said that Kingdom Animalia are motile. Well, not everyone. And they provide a habitat for other animals. So other animals will live in here, live within them. They're just, and I think if you were to see them, you would think they're a plant, but they are an animal. Now they are eaten by starfish and some fish, so they're part of the whole circle of life cycle. And the reason they're a little bit different is that they're probably the most primitive of Kingdom Animalia. So then we have our phylum Cnidaria. So they have a digestive cavity called a colenteron, and that's how they're going to eat. They'll get food into there. They seem very similar to sponges, but they're a little more advanced. So they're waiting for things to come into them. They have a radial symmetry, so they're symmetrical in some form, not necessarily in along one axis, but along several axes. So they're predators. They eat other animals. And they usually provide habitats for other fish. So corals will provide habitats for other fish. And corals are used for decorations and are easily threatened by pollution. And they all have stinging cells to various degrees. So some are very deadly. Others, and we talked briefly about anemones, that's what we played with as kids, is they just a gentle little sting. So as kids are kind of fun to stick your finger in to get that sting. So platyhelminthes. So this includes tapeworms. So they have a bilateral symmetry. So they are symmetrical, but only on one axis. So the cephalization. So the head and the brain. So they do have a head and a brain to them. And this is where we start seeing some difference as opposed to some of the other phyla we just looked at. They have no body cavity. See, sometimes it's easy not to say the fancy word. Just go for what it actually means. They have an incomplete digestive opening. So they only have one opening. So we have multiple openings of processed food for intake and outtake. They have one. Some are parasites. So that's going to be like your tapeworm. They're using other animals to find their food. And in the early 1900s, models used to eat them to be thin because, especially with tapeworms, they take the food that you ingest. They go ahead and take all that food. So then we have nematoda, and these are roundworms. So they're also called nematodes. They have a complete digestive system. So now we have a mouth and an anus. There's pseudoclomate, and I'm gonna be honest with you. Don't know what that means. Didn't look it up. So why don't you look that up? Why don't you tell me what that means? I don't know if you heard of this thing called Google. Give it a try. They're decomposers. So they are predatory, but they eat bacteria and inert substances. So they help break down things in our environment. And they're eaten by other mice and insects. They're beneficial to the garden because they eat insects. So they're in there. That's how they're taking care of and circle of life type stuff and helping us out. So then we have segmented worms, and these are going to be more the worms we're familiar with, we see in the garden, just like earthworms and leeches. They have a true column, so their digestive tract is going to be a lot more kind of like what we're familiar with us. They're very sensitive to vibrations on the ground. So like when it rains, and think about like when we were talking about scaling, how something at that size, what is a simple rain where we're like, oh, that's nice, it's raining, and we don't think much of it, how that affects them in their scale. So they're eaten by other animals. And leeches have this cornified knob to break skin. So leeches attach to people and they do that by breaking through skin. All right, so most mollusks for the phylum Molluscus have shells. There are exceptions, but this is going to include your snails, your slugs, your clams, your mussels, your scallops, your oysters, your octopi. Oh, look, no shell, and your squid. Obviously, since some do, some don't, they're going to come in a variety of forms. A giant squid is kind of what used to be known as a giant sea serpent because people didn't know better and it was scary looking. And this is kind of how we start getting into like garden snails, but very similar. And then phylum Arthropoda, which is joint-legged animals. So it's going to be your insects, your spiders, so your crustaceans, centipedes, which have one pair of legs per segment, and your millipedes, which have two pair of legs per segment. You have an exoskeleton. So if you ever stepped on an insect, it gives a little crunch. That's that exoskeleton providing protection from its soft, squishy insides. They undergo metamorphosis, which means there's some kind of change, like a radical change. Um, if you think of the whole caterpillar butterfly, caterpillar looks nothing like a butterfly. So that's a metamorphosis where the caterpillar changes into the butterfly. Release pheromones, which is like a hormone which can be smelled. So the reason ants are in their nice little lines is that they're secreting a pheromone that kind of communicates with others, like, hey, go this way. And they molt. So they're going to shed their skin. They're going to shed their exoskeleton. So then echinodermata, which is spiny skin, is going to include your starfish, sea urchins. They have a water vascular system. So that means they're taking their water is designed, they're kind of like they're how we have blood flow. They're moving water. They have tubed feet, so they're motile, and they're important predators, which means they get eaten. Let me tell you, sea urchin, very yummy. And then there's us. We're phylum Chordata. So, but this also includes everything from fish, sharks, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. So in some way we have like a notochord, a nerve cord, gills, slits, a tail. So we're still seeing a lot of variety when we're talking about phylum Chordata. But there's a lot of similarity as well, and that's something to look into. Always looking forward if you get excited by any of those phylums to share more with me. But until then, have a good one.